All right, guys, we've got another really heavy vocabulary video. On this one you are going to want to write down everything, so just make sure that you're following along. There's going to be like a little table, a little chart, and on this one we're going to be learning about properties. Okay, so let's start with just some vocab words. These are not actual properties; these are just words you need to know. So whenever I say the word opposite in this class, I'm talking about the sign of the number. When I say the word opposite, I mean one of the numbers is positive and the other one is negative. Okay. This is also known as the additive inverse, and we'll talk about that again in a couple slides. Here are some examples of opposite numbers: positive 12 and negative 12, negative 7 and positive 7. Now that's completely different from the word reciprocal. When I say the word reciprocal, I'm talking about taking a number and flipping it upside down, taking a fraction and switching the numerator and the denominator. Reciprocal has absolutely nothing to do with the sign of the number. In fact, the sign of the number will stay the same. The only thing that changes is the position of the numbers, okay? The reciprocal is also known as a multiplicative inverse, and again, we'll talk about that in a couple of slides. Here are some examples of reciprocals. So I have the number 8, which technically is 8 over 1, and then when I flip it upside down, I get 1 over 8. The one I really want to focus on right now is the number negative 5. The number negative 5 technically is negative 5 over 1, and then I'm going to flip it, and it becomes negative 1 over 5. Please notice that it was negative for both of those. The reciprocal did not change it to a positive. It's really important. If I wanted to change it to a positive, I'll tell you to take the opposite. Okay, so that's just a little background. Remember, you can pause at any point in time and write this stuff down. But let's get into our actual properties. So I'm going to tell you quite a few properties today, and most of our properties have an addition version of the property and then a multiplication version of the property. So you want to write both of them down. If you want to go ahead and like split your paper in half and write down a nice little chart, that would be advisable, so that we can have an example of addition and multiplication. Our first property is called closure. Closure is it's kind of a silly property. It's something that seems super obvious, but we have to write it down anyway. Closure says that if you have two real numbers and you do adding or multiplying with them, your answer will also be a real number. And so it's just saying that real numbers yield more real numbers. They're not going to all of a sudden not be real anymore. Okay, so that's closure. Our next property is the commutative property. The commutative property says that in an adding problem or in a multiplying problem, you can change the order of the numbers and you will still get the same answer. So for adding, that looks like a plus b will give us the same answer as b plus a. And for multiplying, that is a times b will give us the same answer as b times a. Please notice that we're only doing one operation at a time. We are either adding or we are multiplying. It's not a combination of both of them. Also, these properties do not work for subtracting or for dividing. It's only for adding and for multiplying. All right, our next property is called the associative property. The associative property says that if you have parentheses in a problem that only contains addition, it doesn't matter which numbers the parentheses are surrounding. Same for multiplication. So if I have a problem that has only adding in it, a plus b plus c, it doesn't matter if the parentheses are around the a plus b, around the b plus c, around the whole thing, no parentheses, you're still going to get the same answer. Same thing with multiplication. As long as it's all multiplication, it really doesn't matter which numbers have the parentheses and which ones do not. Now, again, if we start putting adding and multiplying in the same problem, that's a different story. Don't forget to pause and write this down if you haven't already. Our next property is called the identity property. This is called the identity property because we're going to take a number, we're going to do something to it, but it's going to stay the same number. It's not going to change. It keeps its identity. For addition, if we add 0 to a number, that number will stay the same. It keeps its identity. And for multiplication, any number times 1 is the same number. We've got some commutative property going on here too. It doesn't matter if it's multiplying in front or behind, it still stays the same. Because when you're adding 0, it stays the same, 0 is called the additive identity, and because when you're multiplying by 1, it's called the multiplicative identity. Okay, so those numbers have fancy titles. I'd also like to point out that if you're gonna name something, if you're gonna name a property, you need to tell me if it's adding or multiplying. So I would say it's the identity property of addition or the identity property of multiplication. All right, so make sure to specify that. Okay, we've got two more properties. The next one is the inverse property. We very briefly talked about this on those vocab words at the very, very beginning of this video. The inverse property is when you take a number and you add a number to it, and you get the identity. So for adding, we're looking for a number plus another number, and the answer is 0. And that happens when we add a number with its opposite. And we talked about the word opposite earlier. The opposite of a number is its inverse. Because when you add a number and its opposite, you get the identity of 0. Now, the identity for multiplication is 1, so now we have to think of a number times another number, but the answer is 1, and that happens when we multiply a number by its reciprocal. Okay, so a number times its reciprocal will give us the identity of 1. Remember that reciprocal does not change the sign, so if I have 3 over 4, I'm going to multiply it by 4 over 3. Both of them being positive would yield me a positive 1. For our final property today, we actually don't have different versions for adding and multiplying. This property actually has both adding and multiplying in it, so we're only going to talk about it once, and it's the distributive property. In the distributive property, you're going to have some adding happening inside of some parentheses, and then immediately next to the parentheses, there will be a multiplication problem. In this example, the A is being multiplied by the parentheses B plus C. It's a combination of adding and multiplying. The distributive property says that you take whatever number is immediately next to the parentheses, and you will multiply it by each term inside the parentheses. Now, just to clarify, a term is something that is separated by adding or subtracting. So in this problem, I have 1, 2 terms. And so I multiplied the A times the B, and then I also multiplied it by the C. This is our last property for today. I hope you paused and wrote them all down. And then that's it. You should be able to finish your homework at this point in time.